Raw milk straight from the cow, unpasteurized cider at the roadside stand, home-cured hams hung without a federal inspection. Your grandmother fed you things that would get her fined today, and she never once questioned whether they were safe. The knowledge went quiet with the regulations. Here are 60 foods they quietly made illegal that Grandma fed us every day. Canned fruit cocktail in heavy syrup was dessert disguised as nutrition, and cafeterias served it proudly. Those cubed peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries floated in sugared liquid that made fruit acceptable to children who might otherwise reject it entirely. The syrup was thick, sweet, and genuinely delicious, transforming institutional fruit into something children requested rather than avoided. Lunch ladies spooned generous portions into small bowls, and children ate every bite. When sugar became the new dietary villain, heavy syrup disappeared in favor of fruit packed in juice or water that children largely refused to finish. The original version delivered vitamins, fiber, and the simple pleasure of sweetness that made school lunches bearable. Modern thinking suggests that moderate sugar consumption, particularly attached to actual fruit, poses minimal health risk compared to the processed alternatives children consume today. Lacto-fermentation in stoneware crocks was how mountain families preserved vegetables through long winters without refrigeration, using salt, water, and thyme to transform cabbage into sauerkraut and cucumbers into pickles. Scientists now understand this process cultivates beneficial bacteria, lactobacillus strains that modern probiotic supplements attempt to replicate. The fermentation creates lactic acid, preserving food naturally while producing vitamins and compounds supporting gut health. Research confirms that traditional fermented vegetables contain bacterial diversity commercial probiotics cannot match. Mountain families who ate sauerkraut with every winter meal, who drank pickle brine for stomach troubles, were practicing preventive medicine. The cool root cellars where crocks sat bubbling provided perfect fermentation temperatures that modern enthusiasts carefully monitor with thermometers. What seemed like primitive preservation was actually sophisticated biotechnology. Now let's move on to another unsafe practice from the past: bread that was bleached with poisonous chemicals. In the early industrial era, bread was considered a simple food staple, but the methods used to make it weren't always as simple as we would like to think. To make bread more visually appealing, bakeries used harmful bleaching agents like benzoyl peroxide to whiten the flour. This practice was intended to make bread appear fresh and inviting, but the chemicals used were anything but safe for human consumption. The white bread, which was popular among consumers, looked better on the shelves, but the bleaching process made it far from healthy. People unknowingly consumed bread made with toxic chemicals that could cause health problems over time, from gastrointestinal distress to long-term damage. The bread was often processed quickly to meet demand, with artificial additives used to make it fluffier and rise faster. The government did not yet have the stringent regulations it has today, so these chemicals remained in food production for years, putting the public at risk. It wasn't until later in the 20th century, when food safety regulations became stricter, that the harmful chemicals used in bread production were banned. Today, consumers are more aware of the ingredients in their food, and bread is made using healthier methods. While the process of bleaching bread may be a thing of the past, it serves as a reminder of how far food safety has come. And speaking of harmful substances, let's move on to another troubling practice from the past: cough syrups that contained heroin. If you've ever watched a raccoon tip over your garbage cans, you might find it hard to imagine inviting one to dinner. Yet, during the Great Depression, resourceful cooks did exactly that, preparing raccoon meat as routinely as chicken. Back then, hunting or trapping raccoons wasn't just a hobby, it was survival. Cookbooks advised carefully cleaning and soaking the meat overnight, typically in vinegar or salt water, to remove the greasy, gamey flavor before roasting it with sweet potatoes or simmering it into a hearty stew. Interestingly, raccoon was even featured prominently in community cook-offs and rural Sunday dinners, considered delicious enough to appear in popular recipes alongside pork and beef. However, the days of openly dining on raccoon meat faded with tightening health and wildlife regulations. Today, Consuming raccoons is strongly discouraged or explicitly illegal in many states due to serious concerns about rabies and parasites. Wildlife agencies emphasize that raccoons, those nocturnal bandits once invited to dinner, carry diseases that cooking doesn't always eliminate. Believe it or not, bear meat used to be a regular item on the menu, especially at hunting clubs and game dinners. It was not uncommon for hunters to bring back a bear from the woods, butcher it on site, and serve it right there in a stew pot or smoked over an open flame. It was rugged, resourceful, and for some, a badge of honor. Bear meat was often described as rich, dark, and slightly sweet. It was a true delicacy in the hunting world. Local clubs would even host annual events where wild game, including deer, rabbit, turkey, and yes, bear, was the main attraction. These gatherings were social, traditional, and deeply tied to local food culture. Today, things are very different. Selling bear meat commercially is nearly impossible due to strict state and federal regulations. Hunting laws are tighter. Processing requirements are more demanding. And because bears are considered both a game species and a potential public health risk, the rules around handling and selling their meat are incredibly complex. Even if you legally hunt a bear, you cannot just walk into a store and sell the meat. It has to be for personal use or shared informally. In many states, selling it at all is completely banned. What was once a symbol of self-reliance and community pride is now a legal and logistical nightmare. The bear might still roam the woods, but on the dinner table, it is nearly extinct. By the 1980s, store-bought pudding had become a staple in American households. Creamy, convenient, and kid-approved, it was an easy dessert that required no effort. Just peel back the foil lid and dig in. But what many people didn't realize was that their favorite tapioca pudding contained an ingredient that would later be banned in several countries: carrageenan. Extracted from red seaweed, carrageenan was widely used as a thickening and stabilizing agent in dairy products. It gave pudding a smooth, uniform texture while preventing separation, making it a dream ingredient for food manufacturers. But there was a catch. Studies later suggested that carrageenan could trigger digestive inflammation and even contribute to serious gastrointestinal issues, including ulcerative colitis. For decades, the FDA and other regulatory agencies debated its safety. While food manufacturers insisted it was harmless in small amounts, consumer advocacy groups pushed for stricter oversight. Eventually, growing health concerns led to carrageenan being banned in certain organic products and phased out of many conventional foods. Despite the controversy, pudding sales never really suffered. Manufacturers simply reformulated their recipes, and shoppers continued grabbing their favorite brands off the shelves. Imagine digging into a bowl of delicious raw cookie dough ice cream, only to learn that the eggs inside could pose a serious health risk. Before pasteurization became a mandatory practice for eggs, raw cookie dough, whether in ice cream or just as a treat, was a risky indulgence. While the flavor was undeniably irresistible, the presence of raw eggs brought the real threat of salmonella. For many, this wasn't a concern, as the risks were often unknown or overlooked. However, as awareness of foodborne illnesses grew, experts and health authorities started to warn against the consumption of raw eggs. Salmonella can cause severe food poisoning, leading to symptoms like vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal cramps, particularly dangerous for children, the elderly, and anyone with a weakened immune system. With so many quirky food trends of the past, let's take a look at one of the most bizarre: Orbit's drinks with floating balls. Salads in the early 1900s were not just iceberg lettuce and ranch. They came dressed in raw eggs, homemade mayonnaise, and a dash of whatever was on hand, then sat out for hours. These were not refrigerated Caesar salads with safety seals. These were countertop creations that looked beautiful in glass bowls, but came with a side of salmonella. And people loved them. In fact, raw egg-based dressings were seen as a gourmet touch. They added richness and that creamy texture people craved. Mayonnaise was often made from scratch at home with raw yolks, vinegar, and oil. No pasteurization, no preservatives, and absolutely no refrigeration once it hit the table. Potluck dinners, family reunions, and church socials all featured salads like this, sitting out in the open for the better part of the afternoon. Today, any salad made with raw egg or left unrefrigerated for more than 2 hours is an automatic health code violation. But back then, it was considered fancy. And if you are still wondering how that did not kill everybody, wait until you hear about the pickled meats people fished out of open barrels, right next to the counter. There was a time when ordering a burger medium rare at a fast food joint didn't raise eyebrows or red flags. In the 1990s, rare burgers at fast food chains weren't just tolerated, they were part of the norm in some regions. Before the E. coli outbreaks that changed the landscape of food safety, undercooked ground beef wasn't seen as a public health concern on the scale we understand today. Chains like Jack in the Box even served burgers with a pink center until 1993, when a deadly outbreak sickened hundreds and led to multiple fatalities, most of them children. The issue wasn't in the prep, it was in the grind. Ground beef mixes surface bacteria throughout the meat, unlike a steak where pathogens live mostly on the exterior. When rare burgers were grilled quickly for that juicy bite, harmful bacteria had a better chance of surviving. The fast-paced kitchen environment, combined with looser regulations, made consistent internal temperatures hard to guarantee. After the outbreak, the USDA enforced stricter guidelines, requiring fast food establishments to cook ground beef to at least 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Today, that pink center has been swapped for safety. You can still get a rare burger, but only at establishments willing to grind meat in-house and accept the liability. So another really interesting bit of info about 1950s culinary habits is that slow and steady does in fact win the race. I mean, if you think being turned into a soup is winning, turtle soup was one of the most common ways for people to warm themselves up in the winter, pass the afternoon, or just have something nutritious while still keeping their finances somewhat in check. That was just if you were buying the stuff, by the way. Most people just began to catch their own turtles near ponds, rivers, and other areas where they would be abundant. Turtle soup was seen as this extremely medicinal, rejuvenating dish that would help you get right back up on your feet. Not sure how much of that is a factual side effect of the dish or just plain old placebo, but what I do know is that this odd dish was a regular on everyone's menus. To the point that the government actually had to introduce regulatory laws to help the turtle populations get back on their feet. People began to overfarm them to the point that the local numbers were dwindling badly. They even became endangered, and that's when the powers that be decided it's time to stop abusing these poor little things just hiding away in their shells, minding their own business. Beef tallow French fries represented a golden age of cafeteria cooking that health reformers dismantled with devastating efficiency. Those fries emerged from deep fryers filled with rendered beef fat, a cooking medium that McDonald's itself used until 1990. The exterior shattered with each bite while the interior remained fluffy and potato pure. School cooks received blocks of beef tallow from suppliers who understood that this was simply how frying was done. The fat created a crispy exterior that vegetable oils could never replicate, sealing the potato and preventing grease absorption. When the anti-saturated fat movement reached its peak, schools switched to partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which we now know contained trans fats far more dangerous than anything in beef tallow. Those original fries were actually the healthier option. The tallow produced superior texture, better flavor, and posed no cardiovascular risk that modern science can identify. The switch to vegetable shortening created the actual health crisis. Rendering lard at hog killing time was the process providing mountain families with cooking fat, skin moisturizer, soap ingredient, and medicinal base, all from portions modern processing discards. Scientists now recognize that properly rendered lard from pasture-raised pigs contains significant vitamin D, healthy monounsaturated fats similar to olive oil, and none of the trans fats in hydrogenated vegetable shortening. The rendering involved slowly cooking pork fat until it liquefied, then straining into crocks where it solidified into pure white cooking fat lasting months without refrigeration. Nutritionists who once condemned lard now acknowledge that traditional lard has a better fatty acid profile than many vegetable oils promoted as healthier. The cracklins left behind after rendering provided protein-rich snacks and additions to cornbread, stretching precious resources. Mountain cooks who saved every scrap of fat were practicing waste reduction that modern sustainability advocates now champion. In the early 20th century, cough syrups were widely used to treat everything from a simple cough to more serious respiratory issues. But what most people didn't know was that many of these syrups contained heroin. At the time, the dangers of heroin and its addictive properties were not well understood, and it was commonly used in over-the-counter medicines. These syrups were marketed as safe, effective remedies, with the promise of soothing coughs and easing discomfort. The syrup, containing heroin, would provide temporary relief, but it also carried a high risk of addiction. Heroin was considered an acceptable substance in medicine back then, and many unsuspecting consumers, including children, were given it as a treatment for their symptoms. It wasn't until the 1920s, when the addictive nature of heroin became widely recognized, that the government stepped in and regulated its use. As a result, heroin was removed from many cough syrups, and stricter controls were put in place for its medical use. However, this practice went on for years before it was outlawed, causing many to suffer the consequences of addiction. When food budgets shrank dramatically in Depression-era America, backyard creatures found themselves promoted from pests to pot roast. Among these unlikely dinner guests was the humble opossum, famously cooked into dishes such as opossum pot roast. Preparation involved meticulous attention, first soaking the meat overnight in salted water, then carefully removing excess fat before slowly roasting alongside sweet potatoes, onions, carrots, and apples. Cookbooks from that time proudly featured detailed opossum recipes, reassuring skeptical home chefs that the meat was tender, mild-flavored, and almost as good as pork, though likely no opossum ever felt flattered by the comparison. Historically significant in southern states, the opossum was even humorously honored at community possum suppers, where neighbors gathered, possibly wondering if dinner had recently visited their own porch. However, modern dining etiquette and strict wildlife regulations have largely removed opossum from American menus. Health officials today strongly advise against eating opossums due to risks of diseases like leptospirosis and parasites unaffected by standard cooking temperatures. Many states now regulate or ban trapping and consumption of these marsupials altogether, highlighting safety concerns over nostalgia. Before there were warnings on labels and public health campaigns, there was homemade ice cream. Every Sunday, especially in summer, families would gather on porches or in backyards to hand-crank their own frozen desserts. Recipes were simple: cream, sugar, maybe some vanilla, and almost always raw eggs. That is right. Raw eggs were a standard ingredient in homemade ice cream. They helped create a smooth, rich texture and were considered perfectly safe. No one thought twice about cracking open a few eggs, mixing them into the base, and passing it around to the kids. It was just how it was done. But things have changed. Today, using raw eggs in homemade recipes is considered a major health risk. The Centers for Disease Control and the United States Department of Agriculture warn against eating anything that includes raw or undercooked eggs due to the risk of salmonella. That risk is real, but back then, it simply was not on most people's radar. Now, if you want that same texture in your homemade ice cream, you need to buy pasteurized eggs or cook the base to a safe temperature before freezing it. The carefree days of tossing ingredients in a bowl and cranking away are mostly gone. It is a reminder of how much food safety has evolved. Something as innocent as a scoop of vanilla could now be considered dangerous. What was once a symbol of home and tradition is now a textbook case in foodborne illness prevention. For centuries, fresh milk came straight from the farm, unprocessed, unpasteurized, and, at least to its supporters, completely pure. By the 1980s, raw milk was still widely consumed in rural communities and health-conscious circles, with some swearing by its superior taste and supposed nutritional benefits. But public health officials saw things differently, and eventually, the debate over raw milk became a battle between tradition and safety. Unlike the pasteurized milk found in grocery stores, raw milk skips the heating process that kills harmful bacteria. Advocates claimed this preserved beneficial enzymes and nutrients, but there was a significant risk. Raw milk could carry dangerous pathogens, including salmonella, listeria, and E. coli. Outbreaks linked to raw dairy led to serious illness and, in some cases, fatalities. Regulators took action. The FDA banned interstate sales of raw milk in 1987, and individual states began imposing their own restrictions. Some outlawed it entirely, while others allowed sales under strict conditions, often requiring direct purchases from farms. Despite the risks, raw milk still has a loyal following, with advocates arguing that modern hygiene practices make it safer. Mountain Dew. Pitch Black was a fan favorite, particularly with its limited edition flavors. However, one of its earlier formulations included an ingredient that would later become the center of a heated debate: brominated vegetable oil. Used as an emulsifier to keep the flavoring from separating in the drink, BVO was a common ingredient in many sodas and sports drinks. Research began to show that BVO could accumulate in the body and potentially cause serious health issues, such as nerve damage and interference with thyroid function. In response to public outcry and growing concerns from health organizations, PepsiCo, the maker of Mountain Dew, eventually announced that it would remove BVO from its drinks. But this isn't the only product that has faced scrutiny for its use of artificial ingredients. Let's talk about shark bites with artificial red dye 3. You are driving down a dusty back road in 1910, and there on the shoulder is a guy selling meat. No refrigeration, no packaging, just a table, a scale, and a grin. What is he offering? Whatever he shot that morning. Wild rabbit, squirrel, raccoon, venison. It was all fair game. Literally, these roadside vendors were a common sight. People trusted the local hunters, figured wild meat was cleaner than what came from the city slaughterhouses, and honestly, it was often fresher. But fresh did not always mean safe. These animals were not inspected. There were no temperature controls, and if something looked a little off, they might just scrape it off and sell it anyway. Still, families bought it up because it was cheap and available. In some places, it was the only meat they could afford. And it was not just a country thing either. City markets often had vendors hawking unregulated wild game under the radar. Today, you can get in serious legal trouble for selling a backyard squirrel burger. But back then, it was just another dinner option. And if meat from the woods sounds risky, just wait until you hear about the fake butter people were spreading on their toast with food dye and leftover beef fat. For kids growing up in the 1990s, few things rivaled the thrill of opening a fast food meal and discovering a plastic toy inside. Whether it was a miniature transformer, a movie tie-in figurine, or one of those oddly satisfying spinning tops, the toy often outshined the burger itself. These plastic freebies weren't just fun, they were strategic. Chains like McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's used them to build brand loyalty young and early. But here's the twist. Back then, many of these toys were distributed without explicit choking hazard labels, even when they contained small, detachable parts. The appeal was obvious. The toys were produced cheaply, shipped globally, and bundled into value meals with no preparation. Just insert, seal, and serve. For the companies, it was a marketing goldmine. For parents, it was an easy win at the dinner table. But for regulators, it became a growing concern. By the late 90s and early 2000s, a number of child injuries and even fatalities linked to toy-related choking incidents prompted stricter federal oversight. The Consumer Product Safety Commission began enforcing labeling requirements more aggressively, especially for items marketed to kids under 3. So, you're all familiar with the way Coca-Cola used to have cocaine, right? Well, in the 1950s, that stopped being a thing, at least on paper. It did, however, still have the coca leaf extract. The very earliest Coca-Cola recipes from the 1880s had small amounts of cocaine from coca leaves, and back then it was pretty common. By 1904, though, amidst growing substance abuse concerns, the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act was passed, making cocaine officially illegal. By the 50s, the drink was stimulant-free, but cocaine comes from those leaves and the extract they're still using, so what gives? Well, this was a little technical and legal loophole. The Stepan Company was one company that operated during this time and had a nice arrangement with the United States government. It was given the right to import coca leaves, albeit under government supervision, and only as long as all traces of cocaine were extracted. These drained leaves would then be used as a flavoring. This agreement and this company still stand today, and the agreement was even reinforced in 1986. Plus, they had to spend an incredible amount of effort and time rebranding Coca-Cola's image. By the 50s, people hadn't forgotten its powdery past, but they were starting to. That's how it's turned into the mainstream family drink you have in your refrigerator today. Frankfurters with natural casings appeared regularly on cafeteria menus, served in soft white buns with mustard and sometimes relish. These hot dogs snapped when bitten, the natural casing giving way to seasoned beef and pork that tasted like actual meat. The nitrates used for preservation became controversial in later decades, with health authorities warning about cancer risks that subsequent research has largely failed to confirm. Those preservatives prevented bacterial growth and created the characteristic cured flavor that made hot dogs satisfying. School lunch programs served millions of these frankfurters weekly without the hand-wringing that would come later. The protein was real, the portions were appropriate, and children ate them willingly. Modern science has softened considerably on nitrate concerns, noting that vegetables contain far higher levels than processed meats and that the cancer risk was dramatically overstated. Unpasteurized milk, often delivered straight from the cow, was a common sight in many households during the early 1900s. Unlike today, where pasteurization is a standard practice to kill harmful bacteria, milk back then was consumed without any treatment to eliminate pathogens. This milk was often still warm from the cow, giving it a rich, fresh taste, but it also posed serious health risks. Unpasteurized milk could contain harmful bacteria such as tuberculosis, brucellosis, and E. coli, which could lead to serious illnesses or even death. Many people unknowingly consumed this milk, relying on local milkmen who delivered it directly to their doors. The practice continued for decades, as the importance of pasteurization wasn't widely understood. The milk, often sold in large glass bottles, was sometimes even reused, adding another layer of contamination risk. Despite the potential dangers, people were often unaware of the risks or simply had no other choice. It wasn't until scientific advancements revealed the connection between unpasteurized milk and foodborne illnesses that the practice started to be phased out. Today, drinking raw milk is illegal in many places, but back in the 1910s, it was just part of everyday life. If you think that was bad, though, wait until you hear about the dangers lurking in your canned food. Let's move on to how lead seals were once used to close cans, unknowingly introducing a whole new level of risk. In an era when practicality trumped sentimentality, even the family pet wasn't always off-limits as a main course. Pet rabbits for meat became common during the Great Depression, as families raised them not just for fluffy companionship, but also as a convenient dinner solution. Surprisingly tender and mild-tasting, rabbit meat was commonly fried, stewed, or baked into pies after soaking overnight in buttermilk or vinegar to reduce gamminess. Because nothing ruins a Depression-era Sunday dinner quite like unwanted backyard flavor. Raising rabbits was uniquely economical, as these fluffy companions conveniently doubled as livestock, feeding on grass and garden scraps and multiplying at legendary speeds. There's a reason we still joke about rabbits' reproductive enthusiasm today. However, attitudes toward rabbits changed dramatically in post-war America. As people increasingly viewed these long-eared animals strictly as cuddly household companions rather than dinner options, cultural taboos strengthened significantly. Modern urban zoning regulations often explicitly forbid slaughtering animals considered pets, making it not just socially questionable but legally risky to prepare rabbit dinners at home in populated areas. If you went to a county fair in the early to mid-20th century, you would not just find cotton candy and funnel cake. In some parts of the country, you would also find squirrel stew, a warm, hearty dish made with freshly hunted game. It was especially popular in rural areas where hunting small game was part of everyday life. Selling squirrel stew was not just legal, it was expected. Local hunters would donate their catch, and volunteers would cook it up in massive pots. People lined up for a taste, often paying to support a local charity or school group. Nobody asked where the meat came from or whether it had been inspected. If it smelled good and tasted right, That was good enough. Today, squirrel stew is nearly impossible to sell legally at public events. The reason? Modern food origin traceability laws. Any meat served to the public must come from an approved source, be processed in a certified facility, and have full documentation for traceability. Caught game like squirrel does not meet any of those criteria. What was once a community favorite is now considered a food safety risk. Even if the stew is perfectly cooked, the origin of the meat alone makes it a liability. You can still make squirrel stew at home, and some rural restaurants may serve it legally under certain conditions. But as far as fairs and festivals go, it is a thing of the past, and it is not coming back anytime soon. For decades, canned goods were a symbol of convenience. They lined pantry shelves, ready to be popped open for a quick meal or a last-minute dessert. Among them, canned peaches stood out, sweet, syrupy, and a staple in everything from cobblers to lunchbox fruit cups. But while the peaches themselves were harmless, the cans they came in were hiding a serious risk: lead solder. Up until the late 1980s, many tin cans were sealed using lead-based solder, a practice that unknowingly exposed consumers to one of the most toxic heavy metals. Over time, the acidic syrup in canned peaches and other fruits would react with the metal, causing lead to leach into the food. The longer the can sat on the shelf, the greater the risk. Scientists eventually confirmed what health experts had long suspected. Lead exposure, even in small amounts, can cause developmental issues in children, neurological problems, and long-term organ damage. In response, the FDA and other health agencies pushed for change. By 1991, lead-soldered food cans were officially banned in the US, forcing manufacturers to switch to safer materials. Shark bites with artificial red dye. 3 were a popular candy in the mid-20th century, known for their bright red color and chewy texture. The candy contained artificial colorings, particularly red dye 3, which was used to achieve the intense red hue. At the time, it was a common practice in the food industry to use synthetic dyes to enhance the visual appeal of products. However, the inclusion of red dye 3 raised concerns as studies began to link artificial colorants to potential health risks. Red dye 3, also known as erythrocene, was found to have carcinogenic properties in animal studies, leading to regulatory scrutiny. As a result, many food products that once featured this dye, including shark bites, were either reformulated or removed from the market entirely. Now let's move on to an equally disturbing but delicious snack: raw cookie dough ice cream. You walk into a general store in 1905 and see jars full of jawbreakers, striped sticks of peppermint, and gumdrops in every color of the rainbow. Looks delicious, right? But here is the problem. Those bright colors came from coal tar, as in the stuff they used to pave roads and seal roofing tiles. Before anyone thought twice about food safety, coal tar dyes were the standard for candy. The more neon it looked, the more kids wanted it. And guess what? Parents were totally on board. Nobody was talking about side effects, allergies, or toxicity. By the late 1930s, the government finally started regulating what could legally go into candy, and coal tar did not make the cut. Today, a lot of artificial dyes are still controversial, but nothing compares to the coal tar days. It is wild to think a stick of candy once came with a side of industrial chemicals, but if you think candy was bad, wait until you find out what they were doing to your daily bread. At the height of fast food's portion-size arms race, McDonald's rolled out its infamous supersize option, an upgrade that made large look modest by comparison. Introduced nationally in the early 1990s, supersize fries and drinks weren't just menu items. They were cultural icons of excess. For an extra 39 cents, customers could tack on over 600 calories to their meal, turning a quick bite into a small feast. The fries came in cartons big enough to be mistaken for mailboxes, while the sodas? Let's just say they had more fluid ounces than a bottle of wine. Fast food chains were competing to offer more for less, and customers were more than happy to supersize everything from meals to their waistband measurements. The preparation process didn't change, just the quantity. The fries were the same golden sticks of salt and oil, but now in amounts better suited for sharing or not. It all came to a halt in 2004. Following increasing scrutiny over portion sizes and health concerns, plus the release of Super Size Me, a documentary that connected the dots between fast food and rising obesity rates, McDonald's pulled the plug. The 1950s didn't just see the rise of raw milk, they were also a hotspot for trans fat-based cooking. It became something of a staple in processed foods for a few reasons. They had first been introduced through partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which was this pretty new patented process that emerged in the 20th century. Basically, the idea was to turn oils from vegetables into these semi-solid fats that you could cook. If this science-y mambo-jumbo is going over your head, and trust me, it went over mine, you might better know this process as the wonderful works of Crisco. It's actually a cornerstone of their entire process. The concept itself has its roots in World War II-era rationing, and when lard and butter were completely out of supply, hydrogenated oils were a pretty neat alternative. Over time, companies realized they're also significantly cheaper and easier to work with too. From there on, making the switch was pretty much a sealed deal. They even put in the work marketing it as a healthier alternative to cook with, especially since cholesterol studies were making everyone rethink their relationship with McDonald's. Trans fats aren't actually any healthier than natural fats, but they are definitely a lot easier to mass produce, so there you go. Whole milk in those little glass bottles was the standard beverage in every American school cafeteria before the fat-free revolution changed everything. Each child received an 8-ounce serving of full-fat milk that delivered calcium, protein, and fat-soluble vitamins in their natural proportions. The milk arrived cold from local dairies, often within days of being collected from regional farms. Lunch ladies set bottles on trays without question because nobody had yet decided that saturated fat was the enemy. Children drank it with cookies, sandwiches, and hot meals because that was simply what milk was. The government's dietary guidelines of 1977 marked the beginning of the end, pushing schools toward skim alternatives that stripped away nutrients. Modern research has rehabilitated whole milk entirely, showing that children who drink full-fat dairy maintain healthier weights than those drinking reduced-fat versions. Sorghum syrup production turned tall grass into sweetener when refined sugar was expensive or unavailable, providing calories, minerals, and flavor that sustained mountain communities. Nutritionists confirm that sorghum syrup contains iron, potassium, and antioxidants that refined sugar entirely lacks, making it nutritionally superior to the processed sweetener that replaced it. The process involved crushing stalks, collecting juice, and slowly cooking it over wood fires until it thickened into dark, richly flavored syrup. Scientists studying traditional sweeteners note that sorghum's complex flavor compounds reduce the quantity needed for sweetness compared to refined sugar. The crop itself grew in poor soil and dry conditions where other crops failed, providing reliable harvest when foods were scarce. Mountain families who drizzled sorghum over biscuits were consuming functional food before that term existed. Modern producers now market sorghum as artisanal sweetener. Moving from one risky practice to another, let's explore the dangers of unregulated patent meats, which were often made with dubious ingredients. In the early 1900s, patent meats were sold in tins, marketed as a convenient and cost-effective option for families. The term patent referred to meat products that were patented by manufacturers, promising a standardized product. However, what consumers didn't know was that these meats were often unregulated, and their ingredients were questionable at best. Many of the meats sold in tins contained low-quality cuts, and sometimes they were made from unknown or unsanitary sources. The canning process itself also left room for contamination, as the metal cans were not always properly sealed, leading to bacteria growth in the product. For many years, consumers trusted these patent meats without any real insight into their safety. Health issues linked to unregulated canned meats were largely unaddressed until later in the century, when food safety laws became stricter and more focused on ensuring that meat products were inspected for quality and cleanliness. In today's world, the thought of buying canned meats without oversight seems unimaginable, but at the time, these products were part of daily life. In tough economic times, resourcefulness often triumphed over squeamishness, and few dishes captured this gritty ingenuity better than the infamous roadkill stew. During the Great Depression, families faced with empty pantries saw opportunity in freshly struck animals, deer, rabbits, raccoons, lying roadside, turning these unfortunate encounters into nourishing meals. After inspection, mostly visual, food safety rules were looser back then, the carcasses were quickly skinned, cleaned, and tossed into pots bubbling with potatoes, onions, carrots, and herbs. Cookbooks from the 1930s humorously cautioned cooks to select only recently deceased creatures, advising that tire tracks were a less than ideal seasoning. Surprisingly, this improvised delicacy wasn't just rural folklore. City folks, too, adopted roadkill recipes as an economical alternative to expensive butcher shop meat. Today, however, collecting roadside meals has moved from economical practicality to legal controversy. Many states now strictly regulate or outright forbid harvesting roadkill, citing health hazards from bacteria, parasites, and unknown diseases, not to mention wildlife preservation laws designed to prevent poaching disguised as scavenging. Long before there were tea bags or coffee shops on every corner, people made their own herbal teas at home. One of the most popular varieties was sassafras tea, brewed from the roots and bark of the sassafras tree. It had a naturally sweet, slightly spicy flavor and was often served warm during cold months. Some folks even believed it had medicinal properties, like cleansing the blood or treating colds. The key ingredient was sassafras oil, rich in a compound called safrole. And that is where the problem started. In the 1960s, scientists discovered that safrole could cause liver damage and cancer in laboratory animals. As a result, the Food and Drug Administration banned sassafras oil as a food additive. What was once considered a wholesome, homegrown remedy became a health hazard overnight. Today, real sassafras oil is banned from commercial food and drink products in the United States. You can still find sassafras-flavored teas, but they use a safrole-free extract or artificial flavoring. The real stuff? Off the market. You can technically still harvest and brew it yourself in small amounts. But selling it is another story. Homemade sassafras tea with real oil is illegal to sell and flagged as a carcinogen risk. It is a powerful reminder of how something can go from folk medicine to federal offense. Sassafras tea was once a symbol of rural tradition. Now it is a banned substance in your cup. For centuries, high-end banquets and luxury dining experiences often featured dishes meant to impress, and in many cultures, nothing signaled status quite like a bowl of shark fin soup. Served at weddings, celebrations, and even business deals, it was a symbol of wealth, generosity, and tradition. One that came at a steep price, not just for consumers, but for the ocean itself. By the 1980s, global demand for shark fins had skyrocketed, leading to a brutal practice known as shark finning. Fishermen would catch sharks, slice off their fins, and toss the often still living animals back into the water to die. It was wasteful, devastating to shark populations, and an ecological disaster in the making. Over time, marine scientists raised alarms, warning that shark finning was pushing several species toward extinction and disrupting entire ocean ecosystems. Despite the environmental concerns, the dish remained popular, with many consumers unaware or unconcerned about its impact. Meanwhile, food safety advocates pointed out another problem. Shark meat is high in mercury, making frequent consumption a serious health risk. Chocolate eggs with toys inside? What could go wrong? In the 2000s, Kinder Surprise eggs were a beloved treat for children worldwide. Inside each chocolate shell, there was a surprise toy waiting to be assembled, sparking joy for those lucky enough to get their hands on one. However, what seemed like innocent fun took a turn when safety concerns arose. The issue wasn't the chocolate or the toy itself, but the combination of both in a single product. Authorities in the United States, concerned about the choking hazard posed by the small toys inside, began enforcing a ban. But the original version, which held both the toy and the chocolate together, was never allowed in the US again. It's fascinating how something as simple as a chocolate egg with a toy inside could raise such a big issue. Now, let's shift gears to something even bigger: Supersized meals that changed the way we view food portions. In the early 1900s, breakfast was not just the most important meal of the day, it was also the most radioactive. Seriously. There were cereals on the market that had been exposed to actual radiation, all proudly advertised as health-boosting. The idea was that radiated wheat or bran had energized properties. These cereals were sold under brand names that sounded vaguely scientific, and they boasted benefits like improved digestion, vitality, and even a sharper mind. In reality, the radiation did absolutely nothing beneficial, and depending on how it was handled, so naturally, breakfast cereals hopped on the trend. Parents fed these to their kids with complete confidence, thinking they were doing something futuristic and smart. No one questioned the safety. Today, irradiated food is tightly controlled and mostly used for sterilization, not for marketing flair. But back then, it was practically a selling point. And while kids were munching down on radiated flakes before school, they were also picking up another childhood favorite, a candy that looked just like a cigarette and sometimes packed a little more than just sugar. In the 1990s, Americans unknowingly became participants in one of the largest food experiments in modern history. Unlabeled GMO ingredients, short for genetically modified organisms, entered the food supply with little fanfare and even less consumer awareness. Engineered for pest resistance or higher crop yield, GMOs were introduced to combat rising agricultural costs and food insecurity. Corn and soy were among the first to be modified, and since those two staples found their way into everything from cereals to salad dressings, most people were consuming GMOs daily without ever realizing it. These ingredients were grown like traditional crops, processed in the same way, and incorporated seamlessly into the food system. The only real difference was at the cellular level and the absence of a label. At the time, the FDA ruled that GMO foods didn't require separate identification if they were substantially equivalent to their conventional counterparts. But consumer pushback eventually caught up. By the 2010s, mounting demand for transparency, along with legal pressure, led to changes. In 2016, Congress passed a mandatory labeling law, and by 2022, food products containing genetically modified ingredients had to disclose that information, though now it often appears under the softer term bioengineered. Funnily enough, beluga caviar used to be pretty cheap. I mean, by the 50s, it was definitely a plaything of the uber elite, but it started out as a pretty cheap thing you could just get from sturgeon. It's kind of hard to imagine, right? The image we associate with it today started from upper-class culture, basically putting the thing on a pedestal. It didn't help that every establishment that was meant to cater to this exclusive class was also putting it on all of their menus. You had beluga caviar on crackers with expensive champagne or chilled vodka, with blini and creme fraiche. The possibilities were pretty endless. It became something you associate with old money, with diplomatic gatherings and big political events, and the kind of thing that was just too rich for the blood of an average worker. That's still true today. But hey, it's at least comforting to know that in some era, it used to be considered pretty cheap, almost unsavory, really. Do you get the hype? I mean, let's say you had the money to burn. Would you still be spending it on caviar? Not to impress a date or to hit a rich flex, just as a food. White bread rolls fresh from the oven accompanied nearly every hot lunch served in 1970s cafeterias. These soft, pillowy rounds of refined flour were everything whole grain advocates would later condemn, yet they provided calories, comfort, and carbohydrates that active children burned through by afternoon recess. Cafeteria workers baked them on site in many districts, filling hallways with aromas that made children actually anticipate lunch. The bread was tender, slightly sweet, and perfect for soaking up gravy or spreading with butter. When whole grain mandates arrived, schools replaced these beloved rolls with dense brown alternatives that children threw away in alarming quantities. The white bread had been doing its job, delivering energy and satisfaction to children who needed both. Modern nutritional science acknowledges that refined grains in moderate amounts pose no particular health threat to active, growing children. Cast iron cooking was dismissed for decades as old-fashioned compared to modern non-stick surfaces, yet scientists now confirm what mountain cooks always knew. These heavy skillets delivered something essential beyond heat. Research proves that acidic foods cooked in cast iron absorb significant dietary iron, sometimes increasing iron content by 20 times or more. Appalachian women who simmered tomatoes, apples, and vinegar-based dishes in seasoned skillets were unknowingly treating iron deficiency anemia that plagued isolated communities. The pans themselves became supplements, leaching bioavailable iron into every pot of greens and every slow-simmered stew. Modern doctors now recommend cast iron cooking for pregnant women and children at risk of anemia. The seasoning process, coating pans with rendered lard and baking until glass smooth, created natural non-stick surfaces without synthetic chemicals researchers now question. Those heavy black skillets passed from mother to daughter carried more than recipes. In the leanest years of the Great Depression, nothing edible went to waste. Not even the parts most people today wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, like boiled squirrel heads. This peculiar dish, particularly favored in southern Appalachia, involved simmering squirrel heads slowly, extracting tender meat from cheeks and even brains, both prized as delicacies rich in nutrients. Preparation required patience, typically slow-boiled with salt, onions, and herbs until the meat easily slipped off the bone, a culinary adventure often joked about as the original head-to-tail eating philosophy. Eating squirrel heads wasn't merely a quirky rural curiosity, but a necessity-driven culinary solution. During times when meat was scarce, discarding any edible part was economically unthinkable. However, modern regulations strongly discourage consuming squirrel brains, not merely because it's unsettling dinner table conversation, but due to legitimate health concerns. Studies revealed a disturbing connection between squirrel brain consumption and a rare fatal neurological disorder known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a cousin of the infamous mad cow disease. Not too long ago, if you wanted liver, kidneys, or even brains, you did not go to a supermarket. You went to your neighborhood butcher. These local shops were community staples, often passed down for generations, and they sold cuts you almost never see anymore. Organ meats, also known as offal, were cheap, nutrient-dense, and widely eaten by working-class families who could not afford premium cuts of beef or pork. And here is the thing. Much of it was sold without any federal inspection. That was not a concern at the time. People trusted their butcher, and the idea of a government official overseeing every part of a cow or pig was simply not reality. These organs were used in everything from stews and sausages to fried sandwiches and casseroles. Today, selling organ meats without proper federal inspection is a serious violation. That includes livers, kidneys, and definitely brains, which are now extremely rare due to concerns about diseases like bovine spongiform encephalopathy. You can still find organ meats, but good luck getting them from someone who knows your name and how you like them sliced. Plenty of people remember cracking open a can of sardines back in the 1980s, peeling back the tin lid to reveal those little fish packed in oil, brine, or in some cases, a chemical cocktail no one thought twice about. Canned sardines were an easy, affordable protein source, found in lunchboxes, kitchen pantries, and late-night snacks across the country. But while they seemed simple, many brands were anything but. Back then, food manufacturers relied on artificial preservatives, including sodium benzoate and BHA, to keep sardines shelf-stable for years. Some products also contained polyphosphates, which helped retain moisture but were later linked to kidney issues when consumed excessively. And let's not forget monosodium glutamate, often added to enhance flavor, though it was more of a cover-up for low-quality fish than a culinary bonus. Regulations on food additives weren't nearly as strict in the 80s, and consumer protection laws were still catching up with science. The FDA allowed certain preservatives that would later be restricted due to emerging research on long-term health risks. By the 1990s, tighter regulations led to a decline in these additives, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. Taco Bell, a beloved fast food chain, found itself in hot water when its beef recipe was exposed for containing much more than just beef. In fact, the fast food giant's beef was revealed to be only about 88% actual beef, with the rest made up of fillers, seasonings, and other non-beef ingredients. The situation escalated when a class action lawsuit was filed against Taco Bell, accusing the chain of misleading consumers by not clearly disclosing the true contents of its beef. The controversy led to a public relations nightmare for Taco Bell, which was forced to change its recipe and improve transparency about its ingredients. Now, let's move on to another colorful trend: EZ squirt ketchup in neon colors. For a long time, the milkman was a trusted part of daily life. Every morning, you would find fresh bottles of raw milk sitting on your doorstep, unpasteurized and straight from the cow. It felt wholesome, local, and pure, until you realized it could also carry tuberculosis, salmonella, and a whole menu of dangerous bacteria. Pasteurization had not yet become standard, and a lot of people thought heating the milk ruined the flavor. So raw milk stayed king. Families drank it with dinner, mixed it into recipes, and gave it to toddlers without thinking twice. But as cities grew and dairy had to travel longer distances, things got messy. Spoilage became a real issue. So did outbreaks. It was not uncommon for entire neighborhoods to fall ill from a single contaminated batch. By the time the 1920s rolled around, scientists and doctors were practically begging for pasteurization to become law. Eventually, it did. But even today, raw milk still has defenders. Some states allow it, others ban it completely. Back then, though, it was just business as usual. And if that seems shocking, you will not believe what they were using as medicine for children, with a prescription and a smile. During the height of America's fat phobia craze in the 1990s, consumers were told fat was the enemy, and Snackwell's fat-free cookies were the shining savior. Launched in 1992 by Nabisco, these treats flew off grocery shelves, marketed as a guilt-free indulgence for health-conscious snackers. With bright green packaging and the promise of being fat-free, they seemed like the perfect compromise. Dessert without the dietary damage. What wasn't front and center, though, was the heavy reliance on partially hydrogenated oils, aka trans fats. The preparation wasn't revolutionary in appearance or taste, but the formula was engineered to replace fats with sugar and processed oils that mimicked mouthfeel. The cookies were soft, chewy, and addictive, which led many consumers to overindulge, assuming fat-free meant risk-free. Ironically, while Snackwells were a symbol of healthy eating in the 90s, the trans fats they contained were later found to significantly raise bad cholesterol and increase the risk of heart disease. By the early 2000s, scientific research and growing public concern pushed the FDA to act. Have you ever felt so hungry you thought you could take down a whole horse? Well, in the 1950s, that wasn't just a piece of hyperbole, it was a very literal statement. While horse meat never really rose to the heights a tenderloin steak or blue crabs did, it was something that people warmed up to more and more as economic strife and being a U.S. citizen started going hand in hand. Do you remember how we were just talking about trans fats being rooted in World War II-era food rationing strategies? Yeah, that whole period really induced a new way of thinking when it came to food. People were doubling down on making the most of whatever they had and opening their horizons to things they had previously been really dismissive of. Horse meat had a pretty bad reputation, especially since most Americans had a sentimental view of horses. They were pets. They were your next best friend after dogs, they were great workers, and they were beautiful animals you could write poetry about. I think we romanticize anything we can ride into the sunset. But anyway, horse meat started to become a pretty common alternative to beef. Butcher shops would even change the name to have an easier time selling it. But most people started to pick up on the fact that cheval wasn't really real meat. Plus, as technology developed and replaced traditional agricultural methods, a lot of farmers found that they had no real use for all the horses they had anymore. And, well, I know I said they were your second closest bestie, but you'd be surprised what people will do to have fewer mouths to feed, especially if it feeds their own in the process. Chicken fried steak with country gravy represented the pinnacle of Southern cafeteria cooking brought into schools across the region and beyond. Thin beef cutlets were tenderized, breaded in seasoned flour, and fried until golden before being draped in cream gravy made from pan drippings. This dish was unashamedly rich, delivering protein, fat, and carbohydrates in proportions that kept children focused through afternoon classes. Cafeteria workers took pride in their gravy, whisking flour into rendered fat, until it thickened into something between sauce and sustenance. The smell alone drew children to the serving line with genuine anticipation. The dish disappeared when fat and sodium restrictions transformed school menus into exercises in culinary deprivation. Modern research suggests that occasional consumption of such traditional preparations poses no meaningful health risk to active children who burn calories throughout the day. Smoke preservation in small wooden smokehouses transformed fresh meat into shelf-stable protein lasting through seasons without refrigeration, using nothing but hardwood smoke and thyme. Food scientists understand that smoking deposits phenolic compounds, organic acids, and carbonyl compounds inhibiting bacterial growth while creating antioxidant protection. The slow, cold smoking techniques mountain families used, hanging hams and bacon for weeks in cool smoke, created preservation conditions that food safety research confirms prevent pathogen development. The specific woods chosen, hickory, apple, oak, each contributed different antimicrobial compounds families discovered through generations of experience. Researchers now document that properly smoked meats remain safe for months at temperatures that would quickly spoil fresh meat. The smokehouses standing in every farmyard represented food security technology refined over centuries. Commercial processors now replicate these techniques but cannot fully match them. In Depression-era America, protein was at a premium, and butcher shops quietly began offering an unconventional choice to economically strained families: horse meat. Marketed discreetly as an affordable alternative to beef, horse meat steaks, sausages, and roasts made regular appearances on dinner tables. Recipes often called for marinating the meat overnight to tenderize its notoriously tougher texture, while seasoning with garlic, bay leaves, and red wine could cleverly disguise its slightly sweeter, iron-rich taste. Interestingly, newspapers of the time published editorials praising horse meat's nutritional value, hoping to encourage skeptical diners to saddle up and give it a try. However, public acceptance faded rapidly after World War II, as horses transitioned fully from livestock status to beloved pets, sparking a cultural backlash against consuming an animal more commonly pictured pulling carts or carrying cowboys into sunsets. Today, slaughtering horses for food is banned nationwide, driven by both ethical concerns and potential contamination from medications given to animals not raised for consumption. The FDA classifies horses as companion animals, effectively shutting the stable door on commercial sale of horse meat. There was a time, and not that long ago, when horse meat was just another item at the grocery store, especially during times of economic hardship like the Great Depression and both World Wars. Horse meat was seen as a practical alternative to beef. It was cheaper, leaner, and in some places even preferred. Entire butcher shops were dedicated to it. Ads ran in local papers. Recipes were published in cookbooks. And yes, people knew it was a horse. It was not a secret. It was just food. What changed? In the United States, cultural attitudes toward horses began to shift. No longer viewed as just working animals, horses became companions, pets even. The idea of eating a horse started to feel wrong, taboo, even unethical. By the 1970s, most Americans had turned away from the idea altogether. Federal laws began to tighten. Today, selling horse meat for human consumption is banned in many states. Even where it is not outright illegal, slaughtering horses for food faces strict restrictions, and facilities that process horse meat for people are nearly non-existent. Yet in other parts of the world, horse meat is still eaten and even celebrated. But here in the United States, it is not just off the table, it is off limits. You know what else is off limits now? Bear meat. By the 1980s, diet culture was booming, and food companies were on a mission to make everything sugar-free. From sodas to snack cakes, artificial sweeteners promised all the sweetness without the calories. One of the most popular and controversial was sodium cyclamate, a chemical sweetener that had already been banned in the US but was still widely used in other countries. First introduced in the 1950s, cyclamate was 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar and far cheaper to produce than alternatives like saccharin. It quickly became a favorite in diet sodas and low-calorie desserts. But in 1969, everything changed when studies linked it to bladder cancer in lab rats. The FDA wasted no time, banning it in the US despite ongoing debates over whether the findings applied to humans. Meanwhile, cyclamate continued to be used in over 50 countries, including Canada and parts of Europe, where regulators determined it was safe in controlled amounts. Even today, some experts argue that the original studies were flawed and that the ban was premature. Regardless, Americans had to look elsewhere for their artificial sweetness, leading to the rise of aspartame and sucralose. The 90s brought us some truly strange food trends, and Orbit's drink with floating balls was certainly one of the most unique. Marketed as a novelty soft drink, Orbit's featured brightly colored liquid with small, gelatin-like balls suspended inside. It was like drinking a science experiment, and for a brief period, it was all the rage. People loved the texture of the floating balls, and the drink's unusual appearance made it a fun conversation piece. But as quirky as it was, Orbit's faced scrutiny for its non-compliance with modern food safety regulations. The drink contained several ingredients that were not in line with the more rigorous standards that had been put in place by the Food and Drug Administration and other health agencies. Even what once felt like an exciting drink can suddenly seem like a bizarre relic of the past. Speaking of bizarre foods, Taco Bell's beef formula also caused a stir for all the wrong reasons. Picture a general store with wood floors, creaky shelves, and in the corner, an open barrel filled with pickled pig's feet, sausages, or chunks of beef. No lid, no label, no gloves. Customers would just reach in with tongs, or sometimes their bare hands, fish out a snack, and keep shopping. These barrels were often reused over and over, topped off with vinegar, spices, and whatever meat was available. It was salty, sour, and packed with flavor, but definitely not packed with modern hygiene. And yet, pickled meat was considered a treat, something to chew on while you waited for your flour to be weighed or your boots to be mended. Kids loved it, adults swore by it, and nobody seemed too bothered by the fact that these barrels sat at room temperature all day. In theory, the vinegar preserved the meat and killed off bacteria. In practice, it was a gamble. But people took that gamble regularly, because refrigeration was rare and sanitation was still catching up with the rest of society. Today, open barrel food service would be shut down in a heartbeat. But 100 years ago, it was just a snack run. And if that already has you raising your eyebrows, the next one takes weird science to a whole new level. Breakfast cereals that were literally blasted with radiation, all in the name of health. Long before energy drinks had their own aisle, there was a neon-colored can that promised a wild night and delivered on every ounce. Four Loko, in its original formula, hit the scene in 2005, though its roots trace back to the early 2000s college culture that demanded convenience, cost efficiency, and chaos, all in one beverage. The drink combined high alcohol content with caffeine, taurine, and guarana, essentially creating a cocktail that could both speed you up and slow you down at the same time. It earned the nickname Blackout in a Can for a reason. Though not technically a 90s product, its cultural groundwork was laid in the late 90s when pre-mixed, ready-to-drink beverages began gaining traction. 4 Loko didn't need to be prepared. You popped the tab and braced yourself. Often sold in 23.5-ounce cans, it packed up to 12% alcohol by volume. That's about the same as 4 beers, plus the caffeine equivalent of a few cups of coffee. It was cheap, potent, and easy to overlook the strength until it was too late. The FDA stepped in by 2010, issuing warning letters and prompting manufacturers to remove caffeine from the formula. Raw milk consumption was something that had really been firmly rooted in agricultural practices around the country. Large-scale industrialized milk filtering is something we've grown up with, but it definitely wasn't the norm for quite a few decades. Most rural areas, and even a lot of suburban ones, relied on milk they'd get from either the local dairy farm a few miles over or their own cows and cattle. A lot of homesteads and rural communities had become so used to the tradition that they genuinely believed unpasteurized milk was healthier for you. See, I think our parents often equate something being economical with it being healthy, but what's good for your wallet isn't always good for your body. This raw milk was indeed a decent bit cheaper, but the health concerns were there. Interestingly enough, a lot of people actually did resist government intervention when it came to regulating milk. They thought they had the right to drink it as God made it, and were pretty suspicious of mass-spread industrialization. And with microplastics being everywhere in us these days, who can blame them? Real butter pats in foil wrappers accompanied nearly every hot roll, cornbread square, and biscuit that emerged from 1970s cafeteria kitchens. These small rectangles of churned cream represented thousands of years of human nutrition science compressed into convenient individual servings. Children peeled back the wrapper and spread golden fat onto warm bread without anyone suggesting this was dangerous. The butter melted into every crevice, adding richness and satisfaction to meals that might otherwise feel institutional. When margarine replaced butter in the name of heart health, schools unknowingly introduced trans fats that proved genuinely harmful. The butter had been protecting children all along, providing vitamin A, vitamin K2, and healthy saturated fats that growing bodies needed. Modern nutritionists have reversed decades of butter demonization, acknowledging that this whole food never deserved its villainous reputation. And air circulation that modern scientists now study with sophisticated instruments. Mountain families dug into hillsides, creating naturally climate-controlled spaces, maintaining temperatures between 32 and 40 degrees year-round. These underground chambers kept potatoes from sprouting, apples from softening, and root vegetables from desiccating through entire winters. Food preservation researchers now understand that consistent cool temperatures and high humidity slow respiration and prevent ethylene damage causing deterioration. The layering techniques, storing apples away from potatoes, wrapping vegetables in newspaper, layering carrots in damp sand, reflected understanding of food chemistry textbooks would later confirm. Families maintaining these cool caverns stored enough produce to survive months of isolation. Modern homesteaders now build root cellars using these principles. In the humid summers of the South and Midwest during the Depression, resourceful cooks dipped ladles into bubbling pots filled with a delicacy now hidden behind a shield of wildlife protections, wild turtle soup made from snapping turtles. Highly regarded for its supposed medicinal properties, this dish combined turtle meat with vegetables and spices in a slow-cooked broth, sometimes enriched with sherry, giving it a sophisticated flair despite its humble swamp origins. Catching snapping turtles required skill and caution. These prehistoric-looking creatures packed jaws powerful enough to snap broom handles, making dinner prep almost as dangerous as it was economical. Cookbooks of the era suggested that turtle meat contained 7 distinct flavors, though skeptical diners joked it tasted mostly like swamp chicken. Overhunting and declining populations eventually forced state governments to step in, enacting strict laws and bans protecting snapping turtles from commercial harvest. Today, turtle trapping is highly regulated or illegal altogether in several states, particularly where species are considered endangered or threatened. Canning was an art, passed down through generations. Volunteers would gather in church kitchens or home basements to prep massive batches, pour them into jars, and sell them at events to raise money for local causes. It was all done with care, but not always with science. Today, that same act of goodwill would violate modern food safety laws. Selling home-canned, low-acid foods like meats, eggs, or vegetables is prohibited without proper inspection and certification. That is because the risk of botulism, a rare but serious illness caused by improperly canned food, is too high. Now, if you want to legally sell canned goods, you need a certified kitchen, approved recipes, pH testing, and in many states, a food handler's license. Homemade pickled eggs might still show up at the odd community event, but officially, they are off the menu. This shift from trust-based community exchange to regulated safety reflects how far we have come and how much we have lost. What was once a symbol of grassroots generosity is now something you might get fined for. For generations, sweetened condensed milk was a kitchen essential. It made its way into homemade fudge, classic pies, and that ever-popular 80s favorite, key lime pie. Thick, creamy, and packed with enough sugar to satisfy any sweet tooth, it was a staple in American pantries. But while the contents of the can were beloved, the can itself turned out to be the real problem. Throughout the 20th century, Food manufacturers lined metal cans with bisphenol A, a chemical designed to prevent corrosion and extend shelf life. It seemed like a practical solution, but there was a downside. BPA is an endocrine disruptor, meaning it can interfere with hormones. Studies later linked it to potential health risks, including fertility issues, developmental problems, and even increased cancer risk. And yet, for decades, consumers had no idea they were getting more than just milk and sugar with every spoonful. By the late 2000s, as public concern grew, regulatory agencies began imposing restrictions. Many food companies voluntarily switched to BPA-free packaging, though debates over the chemical's safety continued. If you were a kid in the early 2000s, you probably remember the excitement that came with the release of Easy Squirt ketchup in neon colors. This bright and bold condiment was marketed as a fun way to get kids to eat their veggies. After all, what kid wouldn't be excited about eating a hamburger topped with purple ketchup? The neon colors, from bright green to shocking purple, were designed to capture the attention of children and make meals more exciting. But despite its popularity, Easy Squirt ketchup was packed with artificial dyes that were soon under scrutiny. Many health experts and food safety advocates started questioning the long-term effects of consuming so many synthetic dyes, particularly on children's health. In some regions, these dyes have since been banned or heavily restricted due to their potential links to hyperactivity and other behavioral issues. Speaking of short-lived food trends, let's look at a controversial ingredient that lasted a bit too long: trans fat-packed Crisco baking sticks. You could walk into almost any drugstore in the 1900s and buy a bottle of something labeled nerve tonic or soothing syrup. It came in a fancy bottle, had a long name like Dr. Winslow's Magical Elixir, and promised to cure everything from headaches to hysteria. Sounds fine, until you read the ingredients. These so-called patent medicines were loaded with things like cocaine, morphine, and straight-up grain alcohol. People were chugging this stuff like it was orange juice. Adults, kids, grandparents, no one was off limits. Parents even gave it to babies to help them sleep. And since there was no Food and Drug Administration yet, companies could slap anything on the label and sell it as medicine. You did not need a prescription, you did not need a warning label, and you definitely did not know you were taking actual narcotics. It was like the Wild West in a bottle. These days, that stuff would get pulled from shelves instantly, but back then it was as normal as cough drops. And speaking of things that looked sweet and innocent but came with a chemical twist, let us talk about what was hiding inside your favorite candy. Picture this. In the 1990s, before flavored tobacco came under national scrutiny, clove cigarettes were seen as a countercultural badge, exotic, aromatic, and often mistaken for harmless alternatives to standard smokes. Imported primarily from Indonesia and sold under names like Jarum, these unfiltered clove cigarettes blended tobacco with ground cloves and a sweet, sometimes candy-like flavoring. The scent was unmistakable, part incense, part spice rack, and the experience was marketed as smoother, trendier, and somehow more artistic than lighting up a Marlboro. Despite being cigarettes in every sense, their packaging and flavor often appealed to younger consumers. Some retailers even shelved them near novelty items or incense, giving off an illusion of safety or at least ambiguity. They required no preparation, just strike a match, and were typically consumed by puff rather than inhalation, though that distinction rarely stuck. Health agencies began to raise alarms about their chemical composition. Not only did they still contain nicotine and tar, but the clove oil also numbed the throat, which could mask the body's natural reaction to smoke inhalation. In 2009, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act banned flavored cigarettes, including clove, on the grounds that they appealed disproportionately to youth. Lard was a really dominant fat, as you might already know. It's basically half the flavor in all of our fast food chains, and there are many hamburgers that wouldn't have their reputation without it. There are an equal number of people going to their doctor for cardiac issues at an alarmingly young age due to it as well. But why was pig fat rendered everyone's drug of choice? Well, in fast food frying, it was known for doing a few delicious things. It gave the food a crispy texture like nothing else did, It enhanced the flavor way better than any natural oils ever did. And since pork was already so widely produced and consumed just about, well, everywhere, it was also a lot more available and affordable than, let's say, unprocessed vegetable oils. This meant that it was ideal for the fast food industry, which almost always needed large-scale frying. Nowadays, there are places that still make lard-based fast food like in the old times, but most people were very happy trading away the flavor for the extra health gains. I guess if you really wanted an authentic one, you'd have to find somebody that tried them in the 50s because they used to use proper beef tallow back then, straight from the animal. It's still something you see a lot in little corners here and there, like Mexican-American cuisine or soul food, but as far as the mainstream goes, it's a relic of the past. Chocolate milk with real sugar and cocoa was the reward every child hoped for during lunch period. This wasn't the artificially sweetened, chemically flavored version that would come later. This was real cocoa powder mixed with whole milk and cane sugar, creating something that tasted like dessert, but delivered genuine nutrition. Cafeteria workers mixed it in large batches, the dark sweetness swirling into the white milk until it turned that perfect shade of brown. Children who finished their vegetables often received chocolate milk as encouragement, a system that worked because the drink was genuinely delicious. When the sugar wars began, chocolate milk became a casualty despite the fact that its sugar content was minimal compared to the sodas children would drink at home. Scientists now argue that chocolate milk's combination of protein, calcium, and carbohydrates makes it superior to most alternatives. The sugar helped children actually consume the milk, which was the entire point. Haybox cooking was the ingenious method where mountain women would bring a pot to boil, then nestle it inside boxes stuffed with hay, quilts, or sawdust, and let residual heat finish cooking over hours without additional fuel. Scientists studying thermal retention now recognize this as remarkably efficient energy technology that modern slow cookers replicate with electricity. The insulation held temperatures in safe cooking range while allowing tough cuts and dried beans to tenderize slowly. Families who couldn't afford constant wood or coal used this method to produce stews, porridges, and braised meats requiring hours of cooking. Modern engineers study these principles for off-grid cooking solutions. The technique also prevented nutrient loss occurring with prolonged high-heat cooking, preserving vitamins that would otherwise break down. Contemporary chefs now use similar techniques under fancy names like passive cooking. When desperation tightened its grip in the Great Depression, even the backyard robins and sparrows became fair game. Commonly known as songbirds, these feathered neighbors found themselves starring unwillingly in Depression-era dishes. Families employed homemade snares, nets, and carefully aimed slingshots to secure their tiny meals. Once captured, the birds, typically robins, sparrows, or blackbirds, were plucked, gutted, and roasted whole over open fires or baked with potatoes and onions into miniature pies. Interestingly, a 1930s household recipe even recommended skewering songbirds, seasoning lightly, and cooking rapidly, likely the original, less glamorous predecessor to today's fancy hors d'oeuvres. But this culinary trend, born purely of necessity rather than preference, soon faced heavy legal scrutiny. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, established earlier but strictly enforced post-Depression, outlawed hunting, capturing, or consuming migratory songbirds to prevent their declining populations. Today, violating these regulations could result in hefty fines or even imprisonment, making songbird skewers a costly dish indeed. For decades, apples were the picture of health, an easy, wholesome snack tossed into lunchboxes, baked into pies, or sliced up after school. But in the 1980s, that simple fruit became the center of one of the biggest food safety controversies in American history. The culprit? A chemical growth regulator called alar. First introduced in the 1960s, alar, also known as diminazide, was used by apple growers to improve color, firmness, and shelf life. It helped apples ripen uniformly and reduced early fruit drop, which meant better-looking produce and less waste. Supermarkets loved it, farmers swore by it, and consumers unknowingly ate it for years. That is, until researchers found something alarming. Alar broke down into a compound called UDMH, which was linked to cancer in lab animals. The controversy exploded in 1989 when a 60 Minutes expose labeled apples as the most dangerous food in American grocery stores. Parents panicked, schools removed apples from cafeterias, and the entire industry scrambled to respond. Under mounting pressure, the EPA banned a law for food use, and apple growers had to pivot fast. Four Loko, often referred to as blackout in a can, was a drink that became a staple in college dorms across the country. This alcoholic energy drink was packed with caffeine, alcohol, and sugar, an unlikely combination that made it incredibly potent and popular among young adults. People consuming Four Loko experienced intense energy and, in some cases, dangerous side effects, including seizures and blackouts. Medical reports began to surface of people ending up in emergency rooms after drinking the beverage. The mixture of stimulants and depressants posed a significant health risk, leading the United States Food and Drug Administration to take action. In 2010, Four Loko was forced to remove caffeine from its formula, and the original version was banned. The drink's wild popularity and its rapid fall from grace are a reminder of the risks that come with consuming substances that alter our state of mind. And as we look at drinks that have gone through drastic changes, there's one more that stirred controversy: Mountain Dew with a mysterious ingredient. You might think margarine has always been the go-to butter alternative, but back in the early 1900s, things got a lot weirder. The first butter substitutes were made from rendered beef fat. Yes, actual cow fat. And they looked about as appetizing as they sound: pale, grayish, and waxy. So to make it more appealing, manufacturers dyed it bright yellow to mimic real butter. Problem was, dairy farmers were furious. They saw it as competition and pushed for laws banning the yellow coloring altogether. That led to some bizarre workarounds, like selling margarine with dye packets that families had to knead in themselves at home. Imagine trying to color your butter before breakfast. But here is the wild part. People still bought it, because real butter was expensive, and these beef fat spreads were dirt cheap. It was one of the earliest examples of a food product getting heavily politicized, with the government stepping in on both sides, sometimes banning colored margarine entirely, other times requiring it to be pink so people would not confuse it with butter. Today, margarine is made from plant oils and has a long list of regulations. If you think that is strange, imagine a salad sitting out all afternoon with a dressing made from raw eggs, and somehow nobody blinked. In the 1990s, the school vending machine was a sacred institution, an oasis of sugar and fizz wedged between algebra and gym class. Stocked top to bottom with candy bars, neon-colored fruit snacks, and enough soda to fill a kiddie pool, these machines weren't just tolerated, they were profitable. Districts under budget pressure often signed exclusive contracts with beverage companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, trading cafeteria wall space for much-needed funding. The machines weren't just snacks, they were financial lifelines. There was no mystery in preparation. Press a button, get a Snickers. Cold soda clanked into your hands like victory. Students consumed the contents between classes, during lunch, and, if the hall monitor looked the other way, mid-lecture. For many schools, vending machines became an unofficial part of the lunch program. But the sugar rush came to an end. As childhood obesity rates climbed and public health experts raised alarms, policy shifted. In 2004, the Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act pushed wellness policies into schools. By 2010, the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act gave the USDA authority to regulate what was sold during school hours. Lead-soldered canned foods were actually a lot more common than you would think. Leading just is a bad idea, but I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they didn't know what they were doing back then. It was a pretty unrecognized public health risk. Canning technology was definitely picking up speed, but the deep, nitty-gritty effects of all this modernization were still subjects that were being studied. Lead-based soldering was unfortunately too common before all of this advancement, and it was extremely common throughout military rationing. Now, modern industries use welded seam canning, but most cans had been sealed with lead because it was really easy to work with. Making sure that the can was as airtight as it could be, it was very resistant to corrosion, and it had a very long shelf life. The issue happens when, well, literally anything unexpected occurs. Say you're just chatting away with your wife while you unpack the groceries and get them ready for the shelf, and you just happen to drop a can. Happens to the best of us, right? Well, let's say the interior was damaged because the big bad fall actually hurt the can. Now you have your food in contact with lead. Let's say it wasn't your fault at all, it was just soldered improperly. Creamed corn made from actual cream and butter appeared in serving lines across American schools throughout the 1970s. Cafeteria workers opened industrial-sized cans of corn and transformed them into something rich by adding cream, butter, and sometimes a touch of sugar. The dish was silky, sweet, and satisfying in ways that plain corn never achieved. Children who might refuse vegetables often accepted creamed corn because it tasted almost like dessert. The fat content made it filling, and the preparation made it palatable to even the pickiest eaters. When dietary fat became the enemy, creamed corn disappeared from menus, replaced by plain kernels that children promptly ignored. The irony is that the cream and butter help children actually consume their vegetables while providing fat-soluble vitamin absorption. Removing the richness didn't make children healthier, it just made them eat fewer vegetables altogether. Clabbered milk was the thick, tangy substance that formed when raw milk sat at room temperature until natural bacteria transformed it into something between yogurt and cheese. Scientists understand this spontaneous fermentation created probiotic-rich food containing beneficial bacteria that modern consumers pay premium prices to obtain. Mountain women who used clabbered milk in biscuits, cornbread, and batters were adding leavening, tenderness, and nutrition simultaneously. The lactic acid produced during clabbering created the acidic environment activating baking soda for rising, while fermentation partially digested lactose for those struggling with fresh milk. Food researchers confirm clabbered milk contained bacterial strains supporting digestive health and immune function. The process required no special equipment. Raw milk simply sat in a warm kitchen until it thickened naturally. Modern raw milk advocates now practice intentional clabbering, finally discovering what Appalachian grandmothers used for generations. Back in the days when supermarket shelves weren't exactly overflowing with choices, families found protein wherever they could, even if that meant looking up into backyard trees for their next meal. Squirrel stew. Yes, these fluffy critters, nowadays famous mostly for raiding bird feeders, were often simmered slowly with root vegetables, onions, and herbs until tender. Considered lean, flavorful, and surprisingly nutritious, squirrels were not only abundant but a staple meat source when grocery money was scarce during the Depression. Interestingly, cookbooks from the era recommended soaking squirrel meat overnight in salt water or vinegar to reduce its distinctive gamey taste, resulting in something remarkably close to chicken, though Grandma probably never admitted it wasn't chicken when company came by. Modern laws recognize squirrels as protected game animals, closely regulated to ensure ecological balance and disease control. After all, nothing ruins nostalgia faster than discovering dinner might have rabies. In the mid-20th century, gelatin molds were the crown jewel of dinner parties and bridge club gatherings. These shimmering creations were filled with everything from fruit and cottage cheese to vegetables and, yes, raw seafood. Shrimp, oysters, and even thin slices of raw fish were suspended in lime or lemon gelatin and proudly displayed as the centerpiece of a well-set table. The idea was part convenience, part culinary daring. Housewives followed recipes from popular magazines and community cookbooks. If you could suspend it in gelatin, you could serve it. Raw seafood added a touch of luxury, even if the texture left some guests raising their eyebrows. Today, that same dish would violate food safety laws in most states. Serving raw seafood, especially in commercial settings, requires strict temperature control, specific sourcing, and often a special license. And gelatin? It does not offer any protection against harmful bacteria or parasites. The Food and Drug Administration now requires any raw seafood intended for consumption to meet detailed standards. That includes freezing at specific temperatures to kill parasites and ensuring it comes from approved suppliers. A home cook making shrimp jello for friends? Probably safe. A business trying to sell it at a market or cafe? Not happening. What used to be a showstopper at social events is now banned from most commercial kitchens. The gelatin mold with raw fish is no longer a conversation piece. It is a health code violation waiting to happen. Few foods capture the nostalgia of childhood quite like a bowl of wobbly, neon-colored gelatin. Whether layered in a church potluck dish or molded into some questionable 80s creation, Jell-O was an undeniable staple of American households. It was cheap, easy to make, and came in colors that didn't exist in nature, literally. The vibrant hues that made Jell-O so iconic came from artificial food dyes, some of which were later linked to health risks. Red number 3, for example, was widely used in gelatin products before studies connected it to thyroid tumors in lab animals. Yellow number 5 and blue number 1, both common in Jell-O, were also scrutinized for potential behavioral effects in children. While food manufacturers insisted these dyes were safe in small amounts, consumer advocacy groups weren't convinced. By the 1990s and 2000s, some countries, including parts of Europe, began banning or restricting certain artificial colors. In the US, the FDA placed stricter regulations on labeling, and some brands voluntarily reformulated their products. Despite concerns, Jell-O remained a household favorite, proving that nothing, not even a little controversy, could shake its place in American kitchens. If you brought a homemade lard sandwich to school today, someone would probably call the principal or the health department. But in the early 1900s, that was a totally normal lunch for a kid. 2 slices of bread, slathered in thick white pork fat, maybe with a little salt or onion if you were lucky. No meat, no cheese, no lettuce. Just pure rendered lard, spread like mayonnaise. And it was not some odd regional thing either. This was a working-class staple across the country. Lard was cheap, easy to store, and packed with calories, which is exactly what parents wanted for their growing kids. Never mind cholesterol or food safety, the idea was simple: fill them up and keep them going. These sandwiches showed up in lunch pails across farms, factory towns, and coal country. And honestly, some kids loved them. The richness, the saltiness. It was comfort food in the middle of a school day. Today, a lard sandwich would set off every nutrition alarm we have. Wait for it, because the next food was even sketchier. Hunted, dragged in from the woods, and sold out of the back of a wagon with no labels and no questions. Back in the 1990s, it wasn't unusual for a kid to crack open a hollow chocolate egg and find a toy tucked neatly inside. Kinder Surprise eggs, the original version, were more than just a candy. They were a mini adventure. Created by the Italian company Ferrero in 1974, they didn't make their way into US stores due to regulations, but they were still widely consumed across Europe and even smuggled into American lunchboxes during family vacations. The concept was simple: a milk chocolate shell wrapped around a yellow plastic capsule containing a small toy, often needing assembly. Parents and kids alike loved the novelty, and the toys became collectible, with some series even fetching high prices on collector markets today. But here's where the story turns. The US banned these eggs under the 1938 Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which prohibits embedding non-edible items inside food. Turns out, wrapping a plastic object inside something meant to be eaten raised enough choking hazard concerns to keep them off American shelves. The US version today, Kinder Joy, separates the toy from the treat. But for many, it's just not the same. Now, sassafras tea was a beverage that most people had considered a very old tradition. Despite that, you may have never heard of it. This was something you would most commonly see in the Appalachian regions and the rural South. Native Americans were the first ones to ever introduce the settlers to the plant, and it was a very popular folk medicine. A lot of Native Americans put a lot of stock in its fever-managing, blood-purifying qualities. Back then, fevers were just about as common as zits, so having handy little herbal remedies was a godsend. It was really cheap, it was always available, even in grocery stores and medicine shops, and it was very easy to make. You could get dried sassafras root, and that was it. You might be surprised that people often had it with root beer, though. A pint of Hires or A&W along with your tried and tested root remedy was actually a pretty common pairing for people. Plus, traditional root beer recipes were made with sassafras, so that's also why it went together really well. It wasn't until studies found out that sassafras contained safrole in it, which is pretty harmful to your liver. Full-fat cottage cheese in individual cups was a protein staple that appeared alongside canned peaches and crackers on countless 1970s lunch trays. The curds were creamy, slightly tangy, and substantial enough to constitute a meal component rather than an afterthought. Children received the same full-fat version their parents ate at home because nobody had yet decided to remove the fat that made cottage cheese palatable. The texture was rich rather than watery, and the flavor was mild enough for children, while satisfying enough to constitute real nutrition. When low-fat versions replaced the original, cottage cheese became something children recognized as diet food and promptly rejected. The full-fat version had been delivering protein, calcium, and genuine satisfaction in perfect balance. Removing the fat destroyed both the taste and the nutritional completeness that made it worth serving in the first place. During the hardest years of the Great Depression, desperate hunger led Americans to pursue protein sources that nowadays would make your local health inspector faint, like bat meat. Although bats weren't common dinner fare, isolated accounts from this challenging era document people trapping and roasting these nocturnal creatures, usually out of sheer necessity rather than culinary curiosity. Preparation involved singeing the fur off bats, an image probably best left to history books, and roasting or boiling the meat thoroughly to combat its intensely gamey taste. Some Depression-era home chefs optimistically suggested marinating bat meat overnight, perhaps hoping to mask flavors described politely as unusually pungent. Humorously, no cookbook of the era prominently advertised bat recipes, suggesting even desperate cooks preferred to keep bat suppers under wraps. Today, however, American laws explicitly forbid hunting or consuming bats, recognizing their critical role in ecosystems as insect controllers and pollinators. Additionally, bats carry diseases like rabies and histoplasmosis, making their consumption extremely dangerous and firmly illegal. During World War II, with grocery store shelves often bare and meat heavily rationed, Americans were encouraged to become more self-sufficient. That is where victory gardens came in. Backyards, schoolyards, and even city rooftops transformed into miniature farms. Along with vegetables, many families raised rabbits for meat. They were small, quiet, easy to feed, and reproduced quickly, making them an ideal source of protein when times were tight. But raising rabbits was only part of the story. Many people began selling them at roadside stands, freshly butchered, often still warm and entirely unregulated. Neighbors and passers-by would pull over, hand over a few coins, and take home dinner. There were no labels, no expiration dates, and definitely no inspections. It was normal, even encouraged, during the war. Fast forward to today, and that same practice would land you in legal trouble. United States Department of Agriculture regulations now require strict oversight for meat sales. Selling backyard rabbit meat might have fed a nation once, but today it would bring the government to your door. Candy cigarettes were not just sugary sticks wrapped in paper. In some of the early versions sold in the early 1900s, there were trace amounts of nicotine in the mix. Let that sink in. Kids were pretending to smoke just like the grown-ups, and sometimes, depending on the manufacturer, they were getting a microdose of the real stuff. No one batted an eye. These candies were everywhere: drugstores, corner markets, even school concession stands. They came in little boxes that mimicked real cigarette packaging, complete with fake filters and smoke puffs made from powdered sugar. To kids, it was fun. To adults, it was just a novelty. But the message was clear. Smoking was cool, and here was your training tool. Tobacco companies did not mind either. In fact, some candy cigarette makers had licensing deals with actual cigarette brands. It was free advertising. It was not until decades later that public outcry and health studies finally shut down the nicotine-laced versions. Today, even the purely sugary versions are controversial and banned in many countries. But for years, they were just another sweet treat in a kid's pocket. And if giving children mock cigarettes sounds wild, the next one turned a notoriously hallucinogenic alcohol into something you were supposed to cook with for your health. Peanut butter sandwiches made with full-fat peanut butter and white bread were cafeteria staples that delivered protein and satisfaction in every bite. The peanut butter was thick, rich, and often contained added sugar that made it appealing to children who might otherwise reject protein sources. Cafeteria workers spread it generously on soft bread, sometimes adding grape jelly to create the classic combination that fueled generations. The fat content kept children satisfied through afternoon classes, preventing blood sugar crashes. When nutrition reformers targeted fat and sugar simultaneously, peanut butter became suspect despite being nutrient-dense. Schools switched to reduced fat versions that tasted like cardboard and natural versions that children refused. Modern nutritionists have embraced full-fat peanut butter as an excellent protein source, acknowledging that the fats it contains are predominantly healthy and that moderate sugar improves palatability without causing harm. Vinegar mother cultivation was how mountain families maintained continuous supplies of homemade vinegar using nothing but fruit scraps, water, and the mysterious living culture that transformed alcohol into acid. Scientists now understand this gelatinous mass as a symbiotic colony of acetic acid bacteria that modern fermentation enthusiasts cultivate intentionally. The process involved adding apple peels, cores, and bruised fruit to crocks of water, letting wild yeasts convert sugars to alcohol, then allowing the vinegar mother to transform that alcohol into acetic acid over weeks. The resulting vinegar contained enzymes, beneficial bacteria, and organic acids that commercial distilled vinegar lacks entirely. Mountain families use this living vinegar for preserving, cleaning, medicine, and cooking, passing down their mothers from generation to generation. Food scientists studying traditional vinegars now document health compounds that pasteurized commercial products destroy. Now that we've seen how meat could be dangerously processed, let's move on to another food trend from the past: lard-rich everything. Lard, a cooking fat made from pig fat, was once the go-to ingredient in kitchens around the world. In the early 1900s, it was used in almost everything, from cooking to baking, and even as an ingredient in packaged food. Lard was cheap, accessible, and versatile, making it an essential part of many recipes. However, the health implications of consuming lard weren't fully understood at the time. Lard is high in saturated fats, which have been linked to heart disease and other health problems. But in the early 20th century, lard was seen as just a normal part of everyday life, and it was used liberally in everything from pastries to frying. Lard was even found in processed foods that we would never expect, such as canned soups, sauces, and even baby food. It was considered a cheap way to add flavor and texture, but its overuse contributed to health problems that weren't understood until much later. As health awareness increased and people began to understand the risks associated with high-fat diets, the use of lard started to decline. But let's not forget how widespread lard consumption once was. Salt curing meat was the ancient preservation method that allowed mountain families to store pork through entire seasons without refrigeration, using nothing but salt, thyme, and careful attention to temperature and humidity. Scientists now understand that salt draws moisture from meat through osmosis, creating conditions too hostile for bacterial growth, while allowing beneficial enzymatic processes that develop complex flavors. The careful rubbing of coarse salt into hams and bacon, the hanging in cool smokehouses, the months of patient waiting, all followed principles that food science would later explain. Mountain families who produced country hams aged for years were practicing controlled fermentation that rivals sophisticated charcuterie. The salt concentration, the temperature fluctuations, the air circulation all mattered in ways that generations of experience refined. Modern food safety researchers now study these traditional methods with genuine respect. In certain coastal communities, particularly in the mid-20th century, school lunches occasionally featured something that would be shocking today: whale or even dolphin meat. These were not urban legends. In some fishing towns, especially near ports or whaling industries, schools substituted beef or pork with what was readily available: marine mammals. It was not widespread, but it did happen. Whale meat was seen as practical, protein-rich, and economical. It was often smoked, canned, or ground into patties and served with gravy or mashed potatoes. In some cases, schools received surplus from nearby processing facilities. It was local, legal, and no one thought much of it. Today, the idea of feeding whale or dolphin meat to children in public schools is not just controversial, it is illegal. The Marine Mammal Protection Act and international agreements now prohibit the hunting and commercial distribution of most marine mammals. These species are protected by law, and their use in any food program would lead to serious legal consequences. Beyond legality, the cultural shift has been massive. Dolphins and whales are now seen as intelligent, sentient creatures. They are not food. They are icons of conservation and marine biology. It is one of the clearest examples of how what was once considered practical and unremarkable is now completely unthinkable. From lunch tray to federal offense, the transformation is total. Feeding children whale meat today would not just raise eyebrows, it would launch an international scandal. Crispy, golden, and impossible to resist, French fries have been a fast food staple for generations. Whether served in diners, drive-thrus, or school cafeterias, they were a go-to side for just about any meal. But in the 1980s, some imported French fries came with an extra ingredient that no one ordered: malachite green, a synthetic dye that would later be classified as a carcinogen. Originally developed as an industrial dye and antifungal agent, malachite green was sometimes used to treat potatoes before processing. The goal was to prevent bacterial and fungal growth during storage and shipping. The problem was that this chemical wasn't designed for human consumption, and studies found that long-term exposure in animals led to organ damage and an increased risk of cancer. Despite these concerns, regulation lagged behind global trade. While the FDA never approved malachite green for food use in the US, some imported fries, particularly frozen varieties, tested positive for traces of the chemical. For generations, Crisco baking sticks were a kitchen staple, found in nearly every home where cookies, cakes, and pies were being made. They helped define the taste of Grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies and were trusted for their consistency and ease of use. But there was a catch. Crisco's baking sticks were loaded with trans fats. These fats, which gave baked goods their smooth texture and longer shelf life, were later linked to a number of serious health problems, including heart disease and high cholesterol. Trans fats raised the bad cholesterol while lowering the good cholesterol, making them a serious health risk. The Food and Drug Administration eventually banned the use of trans fats in many food products. Now, let's talk about another food product that has faced significant scrutiny: unpasteurized fruit juices at fairs. You would think something as basic as bread would be safe, right? Not in the early 1900s. Back then, commercial bakeries were using a little trick to make their loaves look fluffier and more pristine. They dusted the dough with calcium sulfate, also known as plaster of Paris. Yes, the same stuff used to patch holes in walls. It gave the bread that bright white, pure look people associated with quality. Nobody wanted to buy darker, denser bread because they thought it looked dirty or spoiled. So bakers leaned into this little illusion, and it worked. The loaves flew off shelves. Problem was, calcium sulfate is not meant to be eaten. It can cause serious digestive issues and long-term health problems. It took public outcry and multiple food scandals before bread started being regulated properly. Nowadays, you cannot just sprinkle drywall powder into your recipe and call it good, but that was not always the case. Still, the risks did not stop people from eating their daily slice. And speaking of daily, the next item was literally delivered to your doorstep. No questions, no pasteurization, and definitely no safety seal. Nixtamalization was the ancient process of soaking dried corn in wood ash lye water that Appalachian families learned from Cherokee neighbors and practiced for generations. The process involved mixing hardwood ashes with water to create an alkaline solution, then soaking dried corn kernels until the tough outer hulls loosened and slipped away. What seemed like primitive folk cooking was actually sophisticated chemistry that modern nutritionists now celebrate. The lye treatment released niacin otherwise locked inside the corn, preventing pellagra, a devastating disease that plagued communities eating untreated cornmeal. The alkaline bath also increased calcium and improved protein quality by making amino acids more bioavailable. Mountain families who continued this practice never suffered the nutritional deficiencies striking populations eating refined corn. Scientists now study this exact process, calling it one of the most important food innovations in human history. Those grandmothers stirring ash water were performing biochemistry. While city rats today might prompt a frantic call to pest control, desperate times during the Great Depression transformed these rodents from street menace to last resort protein. Eating rat meat wasn't common practice, but urban families facing starvation did indeed resort to capturing and cooking these widely detested animals. Rat meat required meticulous cleaning, soaking in brine or vinegar, and thorough cooking at high temperatures, usually roasted or simmered into stews heavily seasoned to disguise its origins. Historical accounts indicate that rat dinners emerged mostly from extreme necessity rather than culinary experimentation, with some cooks humorously admitting the biggest challenge was convincing diners it tasted almost like rabbit, provided they didn't think too hard about it. Naturally, health concerns arose from consuming urban rodents, notorious carriers of disease, think plague and leptospirosis, conditions more serious than indigestion after Thanksgiving dinner. These legitimate dangers pushed health authorities to unequivocally declare rat meat illegal and unsafe, permanently closing down any possibility of a rat roast revival. Modern laws reflect clear public health priorities, strictly forbidding consumption of rodents, classifying them as dangerous vermin rather than viable food sources. Bone broth simmering was the practice of cooking animal bones for hours or even days until the liquid turned rich, gelatinous, and deeply flavored with extracted nutrients. Scientists now confirm that this slow extraction releases collagen, gelatin, amino acids, and minerals, including calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, in forms the body readily absorbs. Mountain women who kept stock pots simmering on wood stoves, adding scraps and bones throughout the week, were creating liquid nutrition that modern wellness companies now sell for premium prices. The gelatin supports joint health and gut lining integrity, while the amino acids glycine and proline promote skin health and immune function. Nothing was wasted. Chicken feet, pig knuckles, beef marrow bones all contributed their particular richness to the pot. Families who drank bone broth daily, used it as cooking liquid, and served it to the sick were practicing evidence-based nutrition without knowing the science. Lard-based pie crusts appeared in cafeteria desserts with a flakiness that modern vegetable-shortening versions simply cannot achieve. The rendered pork fat created layers in the pastry that shattered at the first bite, releasing buttery richness that complemented every filling from apple to cherry to chocolate cream. School bakers understood that lard was the secret to proper pie crust, a technique passed down through generations of American cooking. The crust was tender yet sturdy enough to hold generous fillings without becoming soggy. When animal fats became dietary villains, schools switched to vegetable shortening that contained the very trans fats we now know to be dangerous. The lard had been the healthier option all along, providing stable saturated fats that the body processes efficiently. Those original pie crusts represented genuine baking craft, not the processed shortcuts that replaced them. Modern chefs have rediscovered lard's superiority, but school cafeterias lost this knowledge decades ago. Ash lye soap making transformed rendered animal fat and hardwood ashes into cleaning products that modern chemists now recognize as remarkably effective and surprisingly gentle. The process involved leaching water through wood ashes to extract potassium hydroxide, then combining this caustic liquid with lard or tallow in precise proportions that saponification required. Scientists understand this as a chemical reaction creating soap molecules with both water-attracting and fat-attracting ends, perfect for lifting dirt and grease. Mountain women who stirred soap kettles outdoors, testing lye strength by feel and timing the cook by experience, were performing industrial chemistry. The resulting soap contained natural glycerin that commercial manufacturers remove and sell separately, making homemade soap more moisturizing than store-bought versions. Modern artisan soap makers now revive these techniques, finally appreciating what hillbilly kitchens accomplished. In the early 1900s, sausages were a popular food, but the process of making them wasn't always as sanitary as it should have been. Homemade sausages were often made without any formal inspections or regulations, meaning that people could be consuming sausages made from questionable or unsanitary ingredients. In many cases, the meat used to make sausages was not properly handled or stored, and the ingredients weren't always up to standard. During the hardest days of the Great Depression, families discovered ways to use every bit of available food, including parts that modern cooks might discreetly discard, leading to dishes like blood soup made from chickens or pigs. This thick, savory stew was surprisingly popular, especially among immigrant communities where wasting animal parts was practically a sin. To prepare the soup, fresh blood was immediately whisked with vinegar to prevent clotting, then simmered slowly alongside onions, garlic, spices, and grains, yielding a protein-rich, iron-packed meal designed to stretch tight budgets further than your granddad's wallet on payday. For generations, lard was not just a cooking fat, it was the cooking fat. Rendered pork fat, made at home from trimmings or scraps, was used in nearly every recipe. Fried chicken, lard, pie crust, lard biscuits, also lard. And nothing was more iconic than Grandma's cast iron skillet, passed down through generations and seasoned with a century's worth of meals. The lard itself was homemade. After butchering a pig, families would boil the fat down, strain it, and pour it into jars or tins to keep in the pantry. No refrigeration, no expiration dates, just instinct, smell, and tradition. Those kitchens are gone, and the hands that ran them never needed a permit. Tell us which one hit your table.